Yes, those people are exhausting to be with after a while.
Totally. And he looks exactly the same. He doesn't look any minute.
Presumably
He was in his 20s and the 60s.
right. Yes.
I guess. I know.
20s in the 60s, so that makes him 10 years older than me. I'm 65 this year, so yeah.
That makes sense. But he looks, he looks as young as you do.
Oh, you say the nicest thing.
Yeah, no, it's fabulous. I'm now looking at. It's like they used to do.
So we do chit chat.
Yeah. We're going to say a word of introduction to start with, okay?
And then, when we've done the chit chat,
You do your bit. You do your bit after me.
yeah.
Yeah. And then they play the intro. Yes. They play the intro. And then you do the first one. I think that's it. Under very different circumstances, but at least we have it this year. We didn't have it last year. It's my pleasure to welcome you, those of you who are here in church with us, and those of you who may be watching on live stream in your own homes or elsewhere. You're very welcome here this evening. Before the quartet play the introduction, Mark Lowther is going to say a little word about the whole piece.
I looked this up beforehand. This is not straight off the top of my head. In the 1780s, Haydn received a rather extraordinary commission which came from the church in Cadiz in Spain. He was asked to write an orchestral piece based on Haydn's 7 last words. And the circumstances of its performance were rather extraordinary. This enormous church in the rocks in Cadiz had all of the windows covered with black curtains, and the music alternated with the priest talking about, reading and talking about the 7 last words. It was very popular. It took off, as they say. And he was asked to make an arrangement for string quartet, which he did. And that's what we're going to hear this evening. He approved a version for solo piano, and he came across the fact that somebody else had made a choral version of the orchestral piece. But he thought he could do it better, so he did. So there are actually 4 versions of this piece approved by Haydn, for orchestra, for string quartet, for solo piano, and for chorus. And Haydn, of course, didn't invent the string quartet, but he did things with the string quartet that nobody had ever done before, and he developed what a string quartet could do in the most extraordinary way over his long life. The string quartet version, as any of you who've heard it before know, is very beautiful. You don't miss the orchestra at all. And that's what we're going to hear this evening. Begins with an introduction, and then we will have words, music, through the sequence. Over to our quartet. From Luke's Gospel. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. And this is the first of the meditations that we'll hear this evening by Timothy Ratcliffe. The first word given to us today is of forgiveness. Forgiveness comes before the crucifixion, before the insults and the death. Forgiveness is always first. Maybe we couldn't cope with listening to the Passion of Christ if we didn't begin with forgiveness. Before we ever sin, we are forgiven. We don't have to earn it. We don't even have to be sorry. Forgiveness is there waiting for us. This sounds very beautiful, but might it not also be a little patronizing? It may seem to make our acts unimportant. Some friends of mine invited me to go and have a rest with them a few weeks ago. They have charming young twins, and a theory that these twins must be allowed to do whatever they want. They could smash things, shout and scream, and change their minds every 2 minutes. I returned home, having enjoyed myself enormously, but giving thanks for celibacy. The theory was that they'd grow up with a deep feeling of security, knowing that they'd be loved whatever they did. I wondered, might they also not come to think that their actions were unimportant? If you know that you're going to be forgiven whatever you do, then why bother to try to be good? Dear old Timothy, he's just murdered another one of his brethren. It's so tedious, but the dear Lord will forgive him, so it doesn't matter. Forgiveness comes first. That's the scandal of the gospel. But it doesn't mean that God doesn't take seriously what we do. God doesn't forget that we crucified his Son. We don't put it out of our minds. Indeed, on Good Friday, we gather to listen to the passion and death of Christ and to remember that humanity rejected, humiliated, and murdered the Son of God. It's because of forgiveness that we can dare to remember that most terrible deed. Forgiveness is not God forgetting Good Friday. It's the Father raising the Son on Easter Sunday. If forgiveness were forgetting, then God would have to suffer the most acute amnesia. But it's God's unimaginable creativity which takes what we have done and makes it fruitful. The medieval image of God's forgiveness was the flowering of the cross. The cross is the ugly sign of torture. It's the symbol of humanity's ability to reject love and to do what is utterly sterile. But the artists of the Middle Ages showed this cross flowering on Easter Sunday, as in the apse of the Church of San Clemente in Rome. Forgiveness means that the cross is our new tree of life, from which we are all invited to eat.
from St. Luke's Gospel. Today you will be with me in paradise. On Good Friday, 2 days before he rises from the dead, Jesus makes this astonishing claim that today the good thief will be with him in paradise. So we see that God has a different sense of time that we do. God forgives us before we've even sinned, and Jesus promises to bring this thief into paradise before he himself has even risen from the dead. And this is because God lives in the today of eternity, and God's eternity breaks into our lives now. Eternity is not what happens at the end of time after we're dead. Every time that we love and forgive, then we have put a foot into eternity, which is God's life. And that's why we can be joyful even on Good Friday, even in the face of suffering and death. I remember going to see a Dominican called Jervis Matthew, who was dying in hospital. He said to me, "Timothy, I'm about to die, so go and buy 2 bottles of beer so that we can drink a toast to the kingdom of God." So I went weeping to buy the beer from the nearest off-license. And while we were drinking it, a nurse came by and said, "Father Jervis, you know that you're not allowed alcohol with your pills." And he replied, "Don't be silly. I shall die tomorrow morning. And so now I drink to the kingdom." When I told Jervis that I must phone to cancel a lecture that I was due to give in London that evening, he told me that he'd never stopped anyone from teaching. I must go and give the lecture, and he'd still be alive when I returned the next day, which he was.
From John's Gospel, "Woman, behold your son, behold your mother." Or in context, when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing near, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour the disciple took her to his own home. Good Friday has seen the disintegration of Jesus' community. Judas has sold him. Peter has denied him. And most of the disciples have run away. All Jesus' labours to build a little community seem to have failed. And then, at the darkest moment, we see this community coming into being at the foot of the cross. His mother is given a son in his closest friend, and the beloved disciple is given a mother. It's not just any community, it's our community. This is the birth of the church. He does not call Mary mother, he says woman. This is because she is the new Eve. The old Eve was the mother of all living beings. This is the new Eve, who is the mother of all who live by faith. So this is our family. Here we see our mother and our brother. Why is our new family born at the foot of a cross? It's because what breaks up human community is hostility and accusation. We are hostile to other people because they are not like us. They are black or white or Chinese. They're Jewish or Muslim. They're homosexual. They're progressive or conservative. We look at others with accusation and seek to expel them. Societies are often built upon exclusion. We seek scapegoats who can bear away upon their backs our fears and rivalries. Jesus takes upon himself all our hostility, all the accusations which human beings make against each other. He is the stone which the builders rejected, which has become the cornerstone, as it says in Psalm 119. As James Allison has written, God is among us as one cast out. At the center of our worship is the one who was expelled. Whom do you accuse today? Whom do you blame for the ills of society or your own pain? To be a Christian is to recognize that at the foot of the cross is born our family, from which no one can be excluded. We are brothers and sisters of each other. In Christ, we are kith and kin. We share the same blood, the blood of the cross. The proper way to address another Christian is brother or sister. If you were to start doing that, people would look at you as if you were odd. We are odd. To call someone your brother or sister is not just to state a relationship. It is the proclamation of reconciliation.
In St. Mark's Gospel, we read, "At midday, a darkness fell over the whole land, which lasted until 3 in the afternoon. And at 3, Jesus cried aloud, 'Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani,' which means, my God, why have you deserted me?" The first 3 sayings of Jesus have shown how even in this darkest moment, something is hatching here. They've shown us forgiveness, happiness, and the birth of community. But here, at the turning point of our reflections, are these words of pure desolation. Here, we just have a cry of pain and loneliness. Is it a question without an answer? Is there anything to be said at all? In his black hole under Beirut, Brian Keenan felt bereft of God. And this is more than doubting God's existence, as one might doubt whether some historical character ever lived. It's more than the absence of someone whom one loves. It's the collapse of all meaning, as if the pith and centre of one's life had been sucked out and one was left hovering over a void. Keenan wrote, "I am full with nothing. My prayers rebound on me as if all those words that I sent up were poured back upon me, like an avalanche tumbling round me. I'm bereft even of God. My own words become bricks and stones that bruise me. I've been lifted up and emptied out. I'm a bag of flesh and scrape, a heap of offal tossed unwanted in the corner of this filthy room." Few of us will ever have endured such utter desolation. But there may have been moments when we feared to be swallowed by the void, and when our lives appeared to be without sense or meaning because God had gone. In such times, proofs of the existence of God are no great help, because words don't help very much at all. These terrible words of Jesus are a quotation from Psalm 22. Someone several hundred years earlier had been in anguish, and he or she wrote these words down. And now Jesus takes these words and he makes them his own. He embraces that experience of desolation and shares it. Even the experience of the absence of God is somehow brought within God's own life.
From John's Gospel. After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said, to fulfill the scripture, "I thirst." Right at the beginning of John's Gospel, Jesus met the Samaritan woman at the well, and he said to her, "Give me water." At the beginning and the end of the story, Jesus asks us to satisfy his thirst. This is how God comes to us, in a thirsty person wanting something that we have to give. God's relationship with creation is entirely that of gift. To be a creature is to receive one's being as a gift. God wishes to be in friendship with us, and friendship always implies equality. And so the one who gives us everything invites us into friendship by asking for a gift back, whatever we may have to give. The late former Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks explains that according to the Jewish tradition, we should not only give to the poor, we should enable them also to give to others. It belongs to their dignity to be not only recipients, but also givers. There's an African proverb that the hand that gives is always uppermost, and the hand that receives is lower down. God makes friendship with us by coming to us as one who begs for what we have. Most of all, he wants us. Usually we think that reaching God is hard work. We must earn forgiveness. We must become good, otherwise he will disapprove of us. But this is wrong. God comes to us before we have ever turned to him. God thirsts for our love. He is racked with desire for us. As the 14th century mystic Julian of Norwich wrote, "The same desire and thirst that he had upon the cross, which desire, longing, and thirst as to my sight was in him from without beginning, the same hath he yet, and shall have unto the time that the last soul that shall be saved is come up into his bliss. For as verily as there is property in God of truth and pity, so verily there is property in God of thirst and longing, which is lasting in him as long as we be in need, drawing us up to his blessing. The longing and the ghostly thirst of Christ lasteth and shall last until doomsday." There's something very embarrassing about admitting that you long for someone when the other person doesn't fully reciprocate. One feels foolish and vulnerable, admitting that one loves more than one is loved. The moment that we own up to our longing, then we become open to rejection and humiliation. Yet this is how it is with God. God is overwhelmed with thirst for us and for our love. And yet he must put up with the occasional, rather condescending pat on the head. "Oh, it's Sunday, we'd better go and visit God." As if God were a boring relative. So when we find ourselves more loving than loved, then we are in God's position. As C.S. Lewis said, it's a divine privilege always to be less the beloved than the lover. Then we may dare to say, with the poet Auden, "If equal affection cannot be, yet let the more loving one be me."
In St. John's Gospel, we read, "A bowl full of vinegar stood there, so they put it on a sponge full of vinegar, on hyssop, and held it to his mouth." When Jesus had received the vinegar, he said, "It is finished." And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. It is finished. Jesus' cry doesn't mean just that it was all over and that he will now die. It's a cry of triumph. It means it's completed. And what he literally says is, it is perfected. At the beginning of the Last Supper, St. John tells us that having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to perfection. On the cross, we see the perfection of love. I hope that we've all been touched by dreams of perfect love, love that is utter and complete. When we're young, we become infatuated, and we may think that no one has ever been so totally in love as us. At least I did. I remember falling head over heels in love with a cousin of mine at a dance when I was 16. I carried her off the dance floor in ecstasy and rather absurdly. But later, I found her kissing someone else in the bushes. That wasn't why I joined the Dominicans. When people marry, usually they're more mature than I was then, but often there's still the dream of the perfection of love. No matter what anyone may say, many people marry feeling sure that they're at the beginning of eternal bliss. And when I joined the order as a rather innocent 20-year-old, I was sure that I would love God and the brethren utterly and forever, and the honeymoon would never end. It does. One soon discovers that one's love is not so perfect. One hasn't been transformed, and we remain much the same selfish, self-centered people as before. And the beloved also may come to seem not quite so fantastic either. He or she may be self-centered, have a terrible sense of humor, snore in bed, or have other irritating habits. Was that dream of perfect love just an illusion? Do we become cynical? But these words of Jesus invite us to carry on seeking to love perfectly. We will arrive at that fullness of love in the end, and at the end. In fact, each of these sayings of Jesus shows us the successive steps in the deepening expression of his love for us. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. In these words, he doesn't even address us. He talks to his Father. Today you will be with me in paradise. This is a more intimate love. It's addressed to us, but from above as a king. Behold your mother, behold your son. This is a further step towards closeness, addressed to us not as a king, but as our brother. My God, why have you forsaken me? This is so deeply intimate that he has entered into our very souls and embraced our own desolation. But the perfection of love is in the words, I thirst. The fullness of love is when Jesus begs for something from us and accepts it with gratitude. Now his love is complete.
From Luke's Gospel. It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour, while the sun's light failed. And the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, "Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit." And by the way, after we hear Haydn's interpretation of those final last words, we hear the extraordinary last movement inspired by the tearing of the curtain in the temple and the earthquake that went with it. The first and the last of the 7 words are addressed to the Father. The fourth and central word, the turning point, is as well, but in God's apparent absence. In the meantime, he's addressed us with increasing intimacy, as a king, as a brother, and as a beggar. Now he gives everything back to the Father. He entrusts us all, with all our fears and hopes, back into God's hands. It's the supreme act of trust. We live in an age of profound anxiety. We're fearful about disease and illness, about our futures, about our children, about our jobs, about failure, about death. We suffer from a deep insecurity, collapse of trust. This is strange because we're far more protected and safe than any previous generation of human history, at least in the West. We have better medicine, safer transport, we're more protected from the climate, have better social security, and yet we are more afraid. I spent 9 years as Master of the Order, traveling around the world in many dangerous places. I saw civil war and genocide in Africa, thousands of people with leprosy, the signs of endless violence. But when I came back to the West, I found people who appeared to be more afraid than anywhere else. September the 11th deepened that sense of anxiety. I was in Berkeley, California, when those few anthrax envelopes were sent, and the panic was tangible. But we have no need for fear. Jesus has entrusted us into the hands of the Father. I suspect that this pervasive anxiety derives from the fact that we have a culture of control. We can control so many things, fertility and birth. So much disease can be cured. We can control the forces of nature. We mine the earth and dam the rivers. And we Westerners control most of humanity. But control is never complete. We're increasingly aware that our planet may be careering towards disaster. We live in what Anthony Giddens has called a runaway world. We're afraid, above all, of death, which unmasks our ultimate lack of control. In A Single Man, by Christopher Isherwood, a middle-aged man looks at himself in the mirror. Staring and staring into the mirror, it sees many faces within its face. The face of the child, the boy, the young man, the not-so-young man, all present still, preserved like fossils on superimposed layers, and, like fossils, dead. Their message to this live, dying creature is, look at us, we have died. What is there to be afraid of? It answers them. But that happens so gradually, so easily. I'm afraid of being rushed.
I thought we were going to have a round of applause then. I'm sure that you, like me, have marvelled or been intrigued over the past year when we've seen both the ingenuity of musicians in their isolation and their frustration as well. And we were going to do this as a simple live stream with nobody in church, but then somebody, I'm not sure whether it was Helen or Rebecca, somebody said, why don't we just, invite people to come? And though our numbers haven't been great, I think it makes a huge difference. And I'm sure that for you, even to have a small audience for a concert, it will have been a help. And to those of you who've been watching at home, not having to worry about intervals, so you can have a glass in your hand or a mug of tea or coffee, I hope it's been something you have appreciated, and something also which I hope has touched you, because the music has been powerful, but I think Timothy Radcliffe's words have been powerful as well, with plenty of food for thought there. And I hope for many of us a good start to Holy Week. So thank you for coming. Thank you, Mark, for sharing with me this evening. Terry Smith, our Baptist pastor, had a Zoom meeting at 5:30 and wasn't able to join us, but we hope that by next year all will be back to normal. But you have to be careful with those sort of statements these days. But thank you all for coming. Those readings are great, actually.
Oh, he's such a wise man.
Wonderful human touch.
Oh, yes. He's such a wise man. I forgot, I looked at the question.
Just turn that switch off there. This won't let all the sound